Dipo, wetin be dis? No tell me say you still dey wear am like dis.
Na my lucky pair.
Dipo lucky pair for what?
I no just know. I just feel like say bad thing go happen to me if I throw am early.
Dipo, is everything okay? You've not bathed since yesterday morning.
Arike, must a man bathe every single day? Some cultures don't even believe in bathing too much. It removes your natural oils.
Dipo, why you still dey use this towel without washing?
That towel still has life in it. Why would I waste a good towel by washing it too often? Washing wears it out faster.
Dipo, like your head, this towel is standing on its own. I left it on the floor and it did not fall flat.
You dey exaggerate too much.
She married the dirtiest man in town. Not poor, not broke, not struggling. Just unbelievably spectacularly filthy in his own house. And she didn't find out until it was too late to turn back. What she eventually did about it, nobody in that family saw coming. Not his mother, not his friends, not even Oladipo himself.
Stay with me till the end, because the way this story closes will surprise you. And if stories like this keep you glued to your screen,
subscribe now, because there's a lot more where this came from.
Before the wedding, Oladipo was a different man. Or at least, he looked like one. Every single time he visited Arike, he arrived smelling like fresh cologne, shirt ironed so sharp it could cut paper, shoes polished until they caught the sunlight. He would sit in her parlor, cross his legs like a gentleman in a movie, and speak softly about the kind of home he wanted to build. A woman deserves peace, he told her once, holding her hand across the table. I want to give you peace, Arike, not stress. She believed him completely. Why wouldn't she? Every version of him she had ever seen was clean, composed, put together. What she didn't know, what nobody bothered to tell her, was that Oladipo's neatness was a performance he reserved strictly for visits. The moment he stepped back into his own space, all of it came off like a costume at the end of a play. His mother knew, his friends knew, even the security man at his old apartment complex who used to hold his nose whenever Oladipo's door opened knew. But nobody wants the bride. Nobody ever does. The wedding was beautiful. Arike's asoebi was a deep wine color that made her skin glow. And Oladipo danced so well that afternoon that aunties were already predicting he'd make a wonderful husband. 2 weeks later, that prediction would begin its slow, humiliating collapse. It started with the boxers. Arike was folding laundry on a Saturday morning, humming to herself, still riding the high of being a new wife, when she found something at the bottom of the hamper that made her stop humming entirely. A pair of boxers clearly worn for longer than any reasonable human being should wear anything without washing it. She held it up between two fingers, the way you'd hold a dead rat by the tail, and called out, Dipo, Dipo, come and see this. He strolled in, took one look, and shrugged. That's my lucky pair. Lucky pair for what? I don't know. I just feel like something bad will happen if I throw it away too early. Arike stared at him, waiting for the joke to land, waiting for him to laugh and say he was only teasing. He didn't. He walked past her, opened the fridge, and drank water straight from a bottle that belonged to someone else's leftover juice, like nothing unusual had just happened in that room. She told herself it was a one-time thing. New marriages have adjustment period, her aunties always said. Give it time. Time gave her nothing but more evidence. Within a month, Arike understood that Oladipo did not simply forget to bathe occasionally. Bathing itself was something he approached like a chore assigned by an enemy. Some mornings he would sit at the edge of the bed for 10 minutes, staring at nothing before announcing he'll do it in the evening. Evening would come, and the excuse would change. My body is tired. The water is too cold. I don't want to catch a cold before that meeting tomorrow. He had an entire library of reasons, updated daily, each one delivered with the confidence of a lawyer presenting evidence in court. One evening, Arike finally asked him directly, gently, sitting beside him on the bed. Dipo, is everything okay? You've not bathed since yesterday morning. He looked at her, genuinely puzzled by the question, as if she had asked him something deeply unreasonable. Arike, must a man bathe every single day? Some cultures don't even believe in bathing too much. It removes your natural oils. Which culture is this now? I read it somewhere. Where? Online. She didn't argue further that night. She simply turned off the light and lay there in the dark, wondering exactly what she had signed up for. The plates came next, and this was where the real chaos began. Oladipo had a habit of eating wherever the mood struck him, on the couch, in bed, standing at the doorway, and leaving the plate exactly where he finished, as if some invisible spirit was assigned to collect it later. Within 2 weeks of marriage, Arike began finding plates in places plates should never exist. One under the bed, crusted with jollof rice but had fossilized into something resembling volcanic rock. One behind the television, which she only discovered because of the smell that had started creeping through the parlor like a slow, patient fog. One, unbelievably, on the windowsill, where it had sat long enough to attract a small congregation of ants, organizing what looked like a full migration route. "Tipo," she said one evening, holding up the windowsill plate like it was Exhibit A in a criminal trial. "How does a plate end up here?" He glanced at it, unbothered. "Ah, that one. I was eating and something on TV distracted me. I forgot." "You forgot a plate? On a windowsill? For 4 days?" 4 days? It's not up to 4 days now." "Dipo, today is Thursday. I found rice on this plate that had gone completely white." He actually laughed, a genuine, easy laugh, like she told him a joke rather than confronted him with evidence of a small ecosystem developing in their home. "Baby, you are too dramatic. It's just a plate." It was never just a plate. It was never just one thing. That was the part Arike hadn't understood yet, that 100 small, just one things, left unaddressed, eventually build a house you don't recognize. The socks were their own separate crisis. Oladipo removed his socks the way other people exhaled, without thought, without ceremony, wherever his body happened to be at that exact moment, under the table, behind the sofa cushions, once, memorably, inside the fruit bowl, resting beside the oranges like it belonged there. Arike began finding single socks in places that defied basic geography, wondering how a man could travel from the bedroom to the kitchen and somehow leave a sock in the bathroom on the way. The bathroom itself deserved its own mention, mostly because Arike still winces thinking about it. Oladipo used one single towel, for what she eventually calculated to be almost 3 weeks without a single washing. By week 2, it had developed a smell distinct enough that she started hanging her own towel on a separate rail as far from his as the bathroom would physically allow. When she finally confronted him about it, holding the offending towel at full arm's length like she was defusing a bomb, his response nearly made her scream into a pillow. "That towel still has life in it. Why would I waste a good towel by washing it too often? Washing wears it out faster." "Dipo, the towel is standing on its own. I left it on the floor and it did not fall flat." "You are exaggerating." She was not exaggerating. She had photographic evidence, taken purely for her own sanity, of a towel that had achieved a level of structural rigidity no fabric should ever reach. Then there was the bathroom itself, which Oladipo treated less like a shared space and more like a crime scene he had no intention of cleaning up after. Toothpaste crusted permanently on the sink edge, water splashed across the mirror and left to dry into cloudy streaks, the bathroom floor perpetually damp in a way that suggested he personally declared war on the concept of a bath mat. Arike started keeping a pair of slippers exclusively for bathroom use, purely to protect her own feet from whatever was happening on that floor. His family's response, when Arike finally walked up the courage to mention it gently to his older sister, was almost worse than the mess itself. "Ah, Arike," his sister said with a small laugh, waving a dismissive hand, as though the whole thing was harmless. "You are taking it too seriously." Arike stared at her. "Too seriously? He's always been like that. He's the only son, remember? There were 3 of us girls. Mom never let him do chores. Every time he tried to help, she'd tell him, 'Leave it, you're a man.' So he grew up expecting someone else to clear up after him." She shrugged, sipping her tea. You'll get used to it. Marriage is about managing these small things. Managing. As if a fossilized plate on a windowsill was a minor inconvenience, instead of evidence of a man who had never been taught to notice his own mess. Suddenly, so many things made sense. Nobody had ever allowed Oladipo to live with the consequences of his own carelessness. Someone else had always washed the plate, picked up the socks, folded the clothes, scrubbed the bathroom, or quietly reset the house before he ever had to think about it. Over the years, that habit had hardened into entitlement. The same instinct that made him ignore a dirty plate also made him ignore himself. If a shirt didn't smell too bad yet, he wore it again. If he felt too tired to bathe, tomorrow always sounded good enough. Years of never being held accountable had quietly taught him that everything and everyone could wait. His mother, when she visited 2 months in, walked through the parlor with an expression Arike couldn't quite read, somewhere between amusement and mild embarrassment, and simply said, "Boys are like this until a certain age. He'll grow out of it. Just keep the house looking nice for visitors. That's all that matters, really." Nobody in that family, it seemed, believed the mess was actually a problem. Only Arike, waking up every morning to negotiate with a grown man about basic hygiene, understood exactly how heavy that small thing had become. Oladipo's friends found the whole situation hilarious, in the particular way men find their friends' flaws hilarious right up until those flaws start affecting them directly. His closest friend, Segun, made it something of a personal hobby to bring it up whenever possible, usually in front of an audience, usually at Oladipo and Arike's place for suya and drinks. "This man," Segun announced one Saturday afternoon when several of them had gathered at Oladipo and Arike's place for suya and drinks. "Do you know he once wore the same blue shirt to work 3 days in a row before I finally asked if he owned another one?" "That's a lie," Oladipo said, laughing along, clearly not offended. "It's not a lie. Everybody in the office noticed. They even started calling you Repeat." The room erupted in laughter. Arike laughed too, because what else could she do in that moment, surrounded by people who found her daily reality endlessly entertaining? But something in her chest tightened as she watched him laugh along. To everyone else, Repeat was just a harmless office joke about a man who seemed unusually attached to one shirt. They had no idea that the shirt only kept reappearing because she was the one quietly washing it, ironing it, and making sure it looked presentable every morning. They never saw the dishes piling up at home, the neglected bathroom, the skipped baths, and the countless little messes waiting for her every evening. Only Arike knew how much work went into protecting the version of Oladipo the world believed they knew. She tried everything a patient woman could think to try. She sat him down for calm conversations, more times than she could count, choosing her words carefully so they never sounded like accusations. "Dipo, I'm not trying to control you. I just want us to share the work of keeping this house nice for both of us." He would nod along in the moment, agree that things needed to change, even apologize sincerely enough that she believed him each time. And then, within a day or two, the plates would return to their strange migratory patterns and the tower would resume its silent transformation into cardboard. She bought cleaning supplies, proper ones, not cheap substitutes, hoping that removing every possible excuse might finally push him toward action. A mop stand by the door, sponges in 3 different colors so there'd never be an argument about which one was for what, air freshener in every room, partly for the house, partly, if she was honest with herself, for her own sanity. He admired the supplies for exactly as long as she explained what each one was for, then never touched most of them again. She made a cleaning schedule, printed and taped to the inside of the kitchen cupboard, dividing tasks clearly and fairly between them. Mondays, he does the dishes. Wednesdays, he handles the bathroom. He glanced at it once, said, "Nice, this looks organized," and then proceeded to ignore it so completely that by the 3rd week, the paper itself has started collecting dust, an ironic monument to a plan that never survived contact with him. She even swallowed her pride and asked his uncle, a respected man in the family, someone Oladipo genuinely looked up to have a quiet word with him. The uncle sat Oladipo down one evening, spoke firmly about responsibility and respect for one's wife, the kind of speech that should have landed. Oladipo listened, nodded seriously, even said, "You're right, uncle, I hear you," in a tone that sounded convincing. 2 days later, Arike found a plate with dried eggs stuck to it between the couch cushions, exactly where she'd found similar plates a dozen times before. There was also the matter of the kitchen sink, which by the 3rd month of marriage had become something Arike approached with genuine dread every single morning. Oladipo had a habit of soaking dishes, which in his personal dictionary meant leaving them submerged in cold, greasy water for however many days it took before either the smell or his own hunger forced a reaction. She once opened the tap to fill a kettle and found a spoon that had been sitting in that water long enough to grow a thin film across its surface, something she genuinely could not identify by sight alone. "Dipo, what is this floating in the sink?" He wandered over, peered in with mild curiosity, as if inspecting a science exhibit rather than his own negligence. "Ah, that's probably from the eba I made on Sunday." "Dipo, today is Wednesday." "Time really flies," he said, completely unbothered, and walked off to find something to eat, apparently unmoved by the fact that his own kitchen had begun to resemble a small, unregulated laboratory. Then there was the incident with his work bag, which Arike still brought up occasionally, mostly because it was the one time even Oladipo couldn't fully defend himself. He'd complained for nearly a week about a strange smell following him everywhere, in the car, at his desk, and even, he swore, in meetings where colleagues had started glancing around the room with polite confusion. He blamed the office air conditioning, he blamed the colleague's perfume, he blamed, at a particularly desperate point, something in the atmosphere. It was Arike who finally found the source, a half-eaten meat pie forgotten in the inner pocket of his work bag for what forensic estimation, her words, delivered flatly while holding the offending item at arm's length, suggested was somewhere close to 2 weeks.
"Dipo, this is the smell. This meat pie has been in your bag." He stared at it, genuinely stunned, as though betrayed by his own belongings. "I don't remember buying a meat pie." "That's not the point, Dipo. But I really don't remember." "The point," she said, dropping it directly into the bin with a decisiveness that made him flinch slightly, "is that a smell followed you to work for a week, and you blamed the air conditioning before you thought to check your own bag." She was tired not just from the mess itself, but from being the only one who ever seemed to notice it, the only one who carried the mental weight of remembering what needed washing, what needed replacing, what silent disaster was quietly assembling itself in some corner of the house, while everyone else moved on with their day untroubled. Something in her began to shift after that. But before Arike ever reached her breaking point, there was one afternoon that nearly broke something else entirely: Oladipo standing in the family. Baba Agba, Oladipo's grandfather's younger brother, was the kind of man whose visits were treated like state occasions. Well into his 80s, sharp-eyed and famously blunt, he was the closest thing the family had to a final authority on anything, and it was understood by everyone without needing to be said that when Baba Agba decided to bless a young couple's home, the home had better be ready to receive that blessing. He didn't call ahead, he never did. He simply arrived one Sunday afternoon in his driver's car, cane in hand, expecting to be let into a home worthy of the prayers he'd come to say over it. Arike was at the market when he arrived. Oladipo opened the door in yesterday's shirt, the parlor behind him looking exactly like the aftermath of a small, private hurricane. Plates stacked on the center table, a pair of trousers draped over the fan, the unmistakable smell of neglect hanging in the air thick enough to taste. Baba Agba stepped inside, cane tapping once against the floor, and simply stood there for a long moment, taking in the room with the slow, deliberate silence of a man who did not need to raise his voice to make a point. "Oladipo, is this the home of a married man or a boy still waiting for someone to clean up behind him?" "Baba, the house is usually..." Arike just stepped out. "I did not ask about Arike," the old man said, cutting him off with the calm authority of someone who had silenced far louder excuses in his lifetime. "I asked about you. A woman does not marry a man to become her mother.
She married a husband, not a second child to raise. He lowered himself slowly into the one clean chair Oladipo hurried to clear for him, set his cane against his knee, and looked at his grandnephew with an expression that carried more disappointment than any shouting ever could. Oladipo had no answer that didn't sound pathetic out loud, so he offered none. Baba Agba said his prayers over the home anyway because that was the purpose of his visit, and he was not a man to abandon his purpose over a messy parlor. But he left without the warmth he usually carried, and the story of that visit traveled through the family faster than Oladipo could have imagined, reaching his mother before he'd even mentioned it himself. That evening, when Arike returned from the market to find Oladipo unusually quiet, scrubbing the center table with more focus than she'd seen from him in months, she didn't need to ask. What had happened had already reached her too. She said nothing about it, choosing not to rub salt into a wound that for once seemed to actually be stinging him. But privately, she wondered whether it would take an old man's cane tapping against the floor to teach him what months of her own gentle words never could. It didn't, not fully, not yet. Within 2 weeks, the old patterns crept quietly back. A plate here, a sock there, the same easy excuses delivered with the same easy smile. Baba Agba's visit had cracked something in Oladipo's pride, but pride alone was never going to change a habit built over an entire lifetime. Something deeper still needed to give. Not anger, not quite yet. Something quieter and more exhausting. The particular tiredness of a person who has tried every reasonable method available to them and watched each one dissolve into nothing. She stopped raising her voice because she had learned by then that raising her voice only made her defensive, made her list all the things she did do, as though a scoreboard of occasional effort could balance out months of daily neglect. She stopped crying about it in front of him too, because his response to tears was usually a hug and a promise, both of which she'd learned meant absolutely nothing by morning. For a while, she simply carried it, cleaned his mess along with her own, cooked meals he barely acknowledged, kept the house presentable enough that visitors never suspected the war being quietly waged behind closed doors. She smiled at family gatherings, she laughed at Segun's jokes, and every night she went to bed a little more tired than the night before, in a way sleep never quite fixed. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with something far quieter, and in the end, far more effective. Arike had gone to visit her friend, Yewande, mostly to escape the house for a few hours, and found herself telling the whole story out loud for the first time. Really out loud, not softened for anyone's comfort. Yewande listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking her head, until Arike finally paused to catch her breath. Arike, Yewande said slowly, you've talked to him, you've tried a schedule, you've involved his family. What exactly are you trying now? I don't know anymore. Then stop trying his way. Try something he's never had to face before. Consequences. The idea sat with Arike the entire drive home, turning itself over quietly in her mind. By the time she pulled into the compound, something inside her had settled, calm and clear in a way it hadn't been in months. She didn't announce anything, she didn't argue, didn't give an ultimatum, didn't even mention it directly. She simply began. That evening, when Oladipo left a plate on the arm of the sofa after dinner, Arike washed her own plate, dried it, put it away, and walked past his without a single word. The next morning, when his socks landed somewhere near the doorway, she stepped around them on her way out and said nothing. When laundry day came, she gathered only her own clothes, sorted them, washed them, and left his pile exactly where it sat, untouched and growing. At first, Oladipo didn't notice at all. He was too used to things simply resolving themselves around him, the house resetting itself overnight like a hotel room, without him ever registering who was resetting. By day 4, the plates had multiplied into a genuine tower, stable enough to concern him structurally. The smell had started creeping out of the kitchen in a way even he, a man with an apparently limitless tolerance for mess, could no longer pretend not to notice. He stood in that kitchen one evening, staring at his own creation, and for the first time, something like real discomfort flickered across his face. Clean clothes became a genuine crisis. He'd worn the same 2 shirts in rotation for a week, hand-rinsing them in the sink at midnight when the smell got too embarrassing to ignore, and hanging them to dry over the shower rail in a way that made the bathroom feel like a struggling laundromat. He went to work looking increasingly disheveled, and it didn't take long for Segun, of all people, to notice. "Bros, what's happening to you these days?" Segun asked one afternoon, wrinkling his nose slightly as Oladipo sat down across from him. "You are smelling somehow." Oladipo, the same man who had laughed along every time Segun teased him in the past, found nothing funny about it hearing directed at himself now. "It's nothing, small issue at home." "Issue, care? Is Arike not washing your clothes again?" The question landed harder than Segun probably intended. Oladipo said nothing, just shifted in his seat, suddenly aware of exactly how his own life sounded when someone else described it back to him. Somewhere in the 3rd week, an even smaller, sharper humiliation landed. Oladipo had an important document he needed for a client meeting, his international passport of all things, required for a quick verification at the office. He tore through drawers, through the pile that used to be his side of the closet, through pockets of trousers he hadn't worn in ages, sweat gathering on his brow as the clock ticked toward a meeting he could not afford to miss. He found it eventually, wedged between 2 old newspapers and, inexplicably, a single sock, its edges slightly damp from proximity to something he chose not to investigate too closely. He arrived at the meeting 11 minutes late, breathless, and spent the rest of the day quietly furious at himself in a way he didn't yet have the vocabulary to explain. That night, he almost said something to Arike. He almost complained that she should have helped him find it, the way she always used to. The words got as far as his throat before he caught himself, some small, uncomfortable honesty rising up before he could speak. She hadn't hidden the passport. She hadn't misplaced it. He had. The mess was his, every layer of it, built one ignored plate and one avoided bath at a time, and for the first time, he didn't have anyone else's name to attach to the blame. The real turning point, the one that finally cracked something open in him, came on an ordinary Thursday morning. Arike woke before sunrise and quietly walked into the spare room. From the top shelf of the black bag, she had been keeping hidden for weeks. One by one, she placed inside the small collection of things that had come to symbolize months of broken promises and quiet exhaustion. Items she had kept, not out of spite, but to remind herself that she wasn't imagining the life she had been living. She tied the bag shut, picked up her handbag, and left the house without saying a word. Around lunchtime, Oladipo drove home to pick up an important document he had forgotten. "Arike?" he called as he stepped inside. No answer. He checked the bedroom, the kitchen, the backyard. Nothing. He pulled out his phone and called her. It rang, then went unanswered. He frowned and tried again. Still nothing. Just as he slipped the phone back into his pocket, it rang. Segun. "Bros," Segun said the moment he answered, sounding thoroughly confused. "Your wife is here." Oladipo laughed. "My wife? Here? Where?" "At the office." He stopped laughing. "What?" "She's downstairs in reception." His heart dropped. "Is she alone?" "Yes." There was a brief pause. "And she's carrying one big black bag." Everything inside him went cold. Without another word, He ended the call and hurried back to his car. By the time he reached the office, his palms were damp with sweat. He rushed into the reception area. There she was, calm, patient, standing quietly near the reception desk. The black bag rested beside her feet. She looked up as he approached. "What are you doing here?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I'm waiting to see your boss." He froze. "My boss?" "Yes." "Why?" She looked at him calmly. "Because the only version of you everyone here knows is the one I wash every morning." She rested one hand on the black bag. "I think it's time they met Oladipo I live with." For the first time since they got married, he didn't laugh. "Arike, I'm serious." He glanced nervously toward the elevators. "What exactly are you planning to do?" She gently tapped the bag. "They think you're always clean. They don't know your expensive cologne hides days without soap. They don't know every clean shirt they admire is only clean because I wash it." She looked him straight in the eye. "Everything you've been pretending doesn't exist. It's all in here. Months of excuses. Months of neglect. Months of me protecting your reputation while you destroyed our home." She paused. "But today, they can finally know who you really are." His breathing became shallow. "Arike, please. You've ignored me for months. I'll change. You've said that before. I mean it this time. You've meant it before too." He reached for the bag. She calmly pulled it away. "No." For the first time in months, Oladipo was terrified. Not because she was shouting, not because she was insulting, because she wasn't. She was completely calm, and somehow that frightened him far more. Just then, the elevator doors slid open. Out walked Mr. Adeyemi. He spotted them almost immediately. "Oladipo." He smiled politely before noticing the tension between husband and wife. "Oh, Mrs. Oladipo." He slowed his steps. "Is everything all right?" Silence. Oladipo felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He stared at the black bag. His entire career flashed before his eyes. He leaned toward Arike, his voice barely higher than a whisper. "Please." She looked at him, then at the bag, then at Mr. Adeyemi. For one long moment, everyone waited. Finally, she slowly lowered the bag. Turning to Mr. Adeyemi, she smiled politely. "I'm sorry, sir. My husband and I just needed to settle something." Mr. Adeyemi nodded. "I understand." After he disappeared into the elevator, Arike picked up the black bag and held it out to Oladipo. "I came here because I wanted you to understand something." He looked at her without speaking. "I have spent months protecting your reputation while you destroyed our home." She placed the bag in his hands. "I'm giving you one last chance." Her voice remained calm. "But if you waste this chance the same way you've wasted every promise you've made to me," she paused, "the next time I come here, I won't stop myself." Then she turned and walked away. Oladipo remained standing in the reception area, clutching the black bag tightly in his hands. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what it felt like to be one decision away from losing everything that mattered to him. That evening, Oladipo returned home long before Arike. The house was quiet. He stood in the middle of the living room, looking around as though he was seeing it for the first time. Everywhere he turned, he saw traces of the life Arike had been carrying alone. Plates waiting to be washed, clothes waiting to be folded. Dust he had stopped noticing months ago. For the first time, he understood that none of it had appeared by magic. Someone had been cleaning behind him every single day, and that someone was growing tired. He rolled up his sleeves. When Arike returned later that evening, she paused in the doorway. The sink was empty, the living room had been swept, the bathroom smelled clean. She found Oladipo quietly scrubbing the kitchen floor. He looked up as she entered. "I'm sorry, Arike." She said nothing. He lowered his eyes. "You've heard that before." He picked up the brush again. "So don't believe my words. Believe what I do from now on."
And for the first time in their marriage, he actually meant it. It wasn't instant and it wasn't perfect. There were some mornings he lingered too long before showering, still the occasional plate that found its way somewhere it shouldn't, still moments where old habits tugged at him, quiet and familiar. But the difference now was effort. Real, visible, consistent effort. The kind that doesn't announce itself loudly but shows up steadily, day after day in the small things. He started doing his own laundry without being asked. Badly at first, shrinking one unfortunate shirt in the process, but trying nonetheless. He kept his side of the bedroom presentable, not because Arike demanded it, but because he'd started noticing, really noticing, how much lighter the house felt when both of them carried their share of it. He even started teasing himself about it in a way that felt different from before, not deflecting responsibility with humor, but genuinely laughing at how far he'd let things go. Segu noticed the change before anyone else did, mostly because the smell had finally, mercifully disappeared. "Oga, what happened to you?" one afternoon he asked, half joking. "You're smelling like a whole different man these days." "My wife happened," Oladipo said simply, and left it at that, though the small, private smile on his face said far more than the sentence did. His mother noticed too, on her next visit, walking through a house that finally matched the peace she'd always claimed to want for her son. She didn't say much at first, just looked around slowly, taking in the changes, before turning to Arike with something like genuine respect in her eyes. "You did well, my dear. Whatever you did well." Then, quietly, almost to herself, she added something Arike hadn't expected. "I think I spoiled him too much when he was growing up. Every time he reached for a broom or tried to help with something, I told him, 'Leave it, you are a man.' And I said it so many times, he stopped questioning it. I never taught him to notice his own mess, so he never learned to care about it. What happened after that, how far he let it go, that became his own doing. But the foundation was mine, and I'm sorry it took this long for me to admit it." She sighed, glancing toward the kitchen where Oladipo could be heard, badly, cheerfully humming over the dishes. "I think you walked away from him, my dear. I honestly wouldn't have blamed you. Thank you for giving him the chance to finally become the man I should have raised." Arike simply smiled, choosing not to explain the full story, choosing to let the results speak for themselves rather than relitigate every frustrating month that had led here. Months later, their home had settled into something neither of them had quite believed possible in those early chaotic days. Not a perfect house, perfection was never really the point, but a shared one. Chores divided not because a schedule demanded it, but because both of them had finally understood that a home doesn't run itself, and love without responsibility is just a beautiful excuse for neglect. One evening, months into this new chapter of their marriage, Arike walked into the bedroom and found Oladipo standing by the laundry basket with a puzzled look on his face. "What happened?" she asked. He looked up sheepishly. "I was just thinking about how I used to live." She laughed. "Trust me, I'm trying to forget." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I still can't believe I thought all that was normal." "You weren't the only one," she said. "Your whole family acted like it was." He shook his head and smiled. "I honestly don't know how you stayed." "I almost didn't." He nodded quietly, accepting the weight of those words. After a moment, he chuckled. "You know what? I used to think you were nagging. And now? Now I realize you were trying to save me from myself." She laughed. "That sounds much better."
He reached for her hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me." She squeezed his fingers gently. "Just don't give me another reason to regret it." "I won't." This time, they both knew he meant it. They laughed together, the old tension long gone, replaced by something far stronger than romance alone: mutual respect, shared responsibility, and a home they had finally learned to build together. And that, in the end, is really what this story comes down to. Marriage was never meant to be one person constantly cleaning up after another. Love isn't proven in grand speeches, but in everyday responsibility. Sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't doing more. It's refusing to keep hiding the problem. Arike didn't change Oladipo with shouting or punishment. She changed him by letting him see, perhaps for the first time, the consequences of the life he'd been asking someone else to carry. And from that day forward, they stopped living like one person serving another and finally began living like partners.
If this story made you laugh, frustrated you, or even reminded you of someone you know, I have 2 questions for you.
If you discovered your husband or wife was as dirty as Oladipo after marriage, would you stay and help them change, or would you walk away?
And if you were Arike, would you have handled the situation differently? What would you have done?
Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear your opinion.
And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more unforgettable stories.